And I was really overwhelmed by sourdough. I was like not interested. I was super intimidated by it for years, years. And I loved baking bread, but I wouldn't touch sourdough. And now I'm completely addicted. And I love it so much. I love eating it. I love making it. And I really just get so much joy from it. And I want other people to get the same kind of joy. I mean, it sounds so corny, but it's really true. I'm not even kidding. Making bread or sourdough bread, it's not that hard, but there is a certain amount of experience you need to have in order to do it well. And the only way to get that experience is to get your hands in the dough, right? Just like you can think about cutting hair all you want, you can read as many books about cutting hair, you can watch YouTube videos about how to cut hair, you can have an expert like Celeste explain to you the details, but when it comes down to it, you just need to grab scissors in your own hands and like try cutting some hair. And the exact same thing is with bread. But so even then, like the first handful of loaves I made were horrible. Well, I mean, they were edible, they were just really dense. And so the whole thing is like you want to work with your ingredients, with the temperature outside. You want to work with all of these variables to encourage fermentation to thrive, because that's how these carbon dioxide bubbles will appear, and that's what is trapped in the dough, which causes it to rise in the oven. So you just have to know what you're working with and kind of like how to get the bits from it that you want to get from it. Different flours will have an effect. More so in your final loaf. So when you want to create a sourdough starter, it's not as picky actually. So you can use a variety of different kinds of flours. All-purpose flour is a safe bet, and it's probably, you know, a flour that you can get pretty easily. So you could just do all-purpose flour and water and just mix equal parts all-purpose flour and water day after day, and it will start to get those. What happens is it gets yeast from the area that it's in, so it just takes what's in the air basically, and incorporates it into that flour and water. When you're creating your starter, it is best to stick with one flour or the same combination of flours. So you could just do all-purpose, like I said, but if you also have whole wheat flour and you really like whole wheat flour and you want to use that, you can do that. That's fine too. So okay, you don't. So all-purpose, stick with all-purpose. Basically any flour except for rice flour, like that's, I mean, there's no gluten in that, so like stay away from that. But pretty much any flour you have is fine, and just stick with it. And consistency is really the main thing. When I'm feeding my starter, which is what you have to do to keep it alive, after you create a starter, you have to keep feeding it with flour and water in order to maintain the yeasts in it, to keep it alive. And you can change out the flours, and it's really not that picky. When it rises and falls predictably. So for instance, with mine, I know that, so like in the morning, when I feed, I take 10 grams of it from I call it a maintenance starter. I take 10 grams out of it, put it in a different container. Get rid of that maintenance starter, because now I'm creating a new maintenance starter. So I take 10 grams of that out. I do 20 grams. My go-to is 20 grams of white flour, 20 grams of rye flour, 40 grams of water. So equal parts flour and water added to this 10 grams of starter. Mix that all up really well. And then that is going to be my starter. But when it starts, it's like, so I have it in this glass jar so I can watch what it's doing. When it starts, it's like this small, and it just looks like a pile of like flour and water. And you're like, what is this? This is nothing. But then 6 hours later, it has like just about tripled in size, if not more. It's light, it's fluffy. On the top, there are bubbles. You can stare at it, it's like when water boils. It's, I mean, not that vigorously, but there are bubbles actively moving around. They're like, hey, I'm alive and I'm doing my thing. And that's, I mean, and it's just predictable. I know how long it takes. I know what stage it's going to be at a certain hour. And fermentation works like a bell curve. So it's like peak maturity is like right before it actually gets to its peak. And then it comes down again. And this whole bit at the top of the bell curve is like when you want to take it away and incorporate it into a bread dough. Because then it will, so after it's like, oh, it grows, it gets super bubbly, like what I was talking about before, and like, oh, it's alive. Well, then it starts to chill out. And then after you've passed that bell curve, then it's like, okay, I'm done, I'm chill now. And it kind of goes back down. And it is not as bubbly. You should get to know the smell of your sourdough starter. It's going to smell kind of acidic, but pleasantly acidic. And that's, I think, how you'll know when it's ready after you've created it. It will smell kind of sour and but good, like pleasantly sour. I feel healthier when I eat sourdough bread. And I would have to do like some scientific tests on myself, but I have read a lot of things that like it's nicer to our bodies than because fermentation takes time and it breaks down it breaks down the bits in wheat that our bodies don't like digesting, that a lot of people have like gluten intolerance to. It literally breaks it down. It's called phytase, Phtayse, and it breaks those things down. And so like scientifically, literally it is easier for our bodies to digest. And so I literally feel better when I eat sourdough bread too. So basically the day that you mix the dough together is like the most hands-on day with it, because then I'm gonna put it in the fridge overnight and then I'll bake it in the morning, probably like more like midday now. So I have my dough here. It's gone through bulk fermentation. So it's sat for most of the day. I've done stretch and folds, which is a process of like stretching the dough over itself. And that makes the gluten in the dough more extensible. So it makes it stretchier. And the reason that's important is because when you put the dough in the oven, the way it gets that like beautiful, fluffy texture that we all want in our sourdough bread, in any bread really, is because it's able to expand with the carbon dioxide that has built up in it, expand and get bigger, and then trap it in as it bakes. And if it can't stretch, then it's going to be dense, because the gluten isn't isn't flexible enough. It's not going to, there's not going to be any give. So that's why it's important to do the stretch and fold steps. And then I let it sit for a few hours. And now I'm going to shape it and then put it in, these are called bannetons. And it's basically, it's a proofing basket. I have two little ones here, so I'm gonna break this dough into two. If you don't have a banneton and a cloth liner for it, you can just use a bowl with a kitchen towel with the cloth, the kitchen cloth inside it, and bam, that's perfect. And importantly, I need to dust flour on this so that the dough does not stick to the cloth when I want to remove the dough tomorrow morning. And this is where rice flour comes in really handy, because rice flour granules are like much smaller and they're not as prone to like stickiness, to get like kind of gummy and sticky. So they make it really nice. You know. Okay, so I'm shaking it up. So here's my dough, my pickle dough. This is an experiment. So I'm going to do, this is a really wet dough. So get my hands all floured up. So remember the stretch and folds I told you about that I did earlier. So I'm gonna do a bit of stretch and fold now as well to shape. So what that means is grabbing one end of it, putting it over itself, grabbing another end and just kind of stretching it, pulling it over itself. And see how I'm getting my hands kind of covered in flour between times, because this is really wet dough. So floury hands means my fingers won't stick to it as much. So it makes it much easier to shape. And then I kind of folded it over itself, and then I'm shaping it into a ball. Although actually, I kind of want to do more of an oval. Sorry, I just remembered with this, that's hard. Look it up. And then I just popped it in. I'll show you. So it's not as like bouncy as if you do an added yeast dough. It's a little more fragile. But so let's see. So no, it doesn't do like a bounce back thing necessarily.
I see.
I mean, it kind of does, but it's not as intense as, because the yeast is not as robust with this. That's the one. And then I'm gonna sprinkle a little flour on top, and then I'll cover that with a kitchen towel and put it in the fridge. And then I'm just gonna do the same thing with this other little one. But that's it, pretty much. So if you have any, I don't know if it's helpful to watch or not, but it's basically just playing with Play-Doh, kind of. So the proofing is another way of just saying it's final rise.
Okay.
And that final rise is for 15 hours. So I'm putting in now, it's 11 p.m. here, so I'll do it like early afternoon tomorrow. A really good parallel with like Tai Chi and sourdough and like karate and yeasted breads. I love that. I do think there's truth to that. But I have to say, like my personality is also more karate. Like I would rather just like get it done. But I think actually sourdough is really good for my mentality. Like I'm not kidding. I think it's good for me.